I never thought I'd be left out in the cold by my own daughter. I never imagined the man she married would strip me of my dignity in my lowest moment, and that she would let him. But what they didn't know was that life had one last card for me to play. And when I played it, everything changed. What you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's a turning point. Leave a comment below telling me where you're tuning in from, and make sure you hit subscribe to Sweet Revenge so you don't miss the next one. My name is Helen Parker. I'm 58, and until recently I clung to the idea of something called unconditional love, especially when it came to family. I spent decades pouring myself into my husband and our daughter, Jessica. Every meal, every holiday, every sacrifice, I thought it all mattered. When cancer took my husband last year, it felt like the ground vanished beneath my feet. But I told myself I still had Jessica. At least I had her. The house my husband and I built in Cedar Park just outside of Austin was suffocating with memories. I couldn't take the silence of expecting his footsteps in the kitchen and hearing nothing. I sold it and moved into Jessica and her husband Ryan's place. Or rather, Jessica insisted. Ryan barely looked up from his phone when I arrived with my bags. I tried to be invisible. I kept to the little back bedroom. I cooked dinners, folded laundry, offered to help however I could. I thought if I was useful, no one would resent me. But Ryan made it clear I was an unwelcome guest. It began with looks, those irritated glances that made me feel like a stain on his carpet. He'd huff if I asked a question, change the channel while I was in the middle of a show. One evening, I heard him mutter "charity case" under his breath as he walked by. I wanted to believe I misheard, but I knew I hadn't. "Jessica?" She stayed quiet. When I searched her eyes for support, she brushed it off. "He's just stressed," she'd say. "Work's been rough." I bit my tongue and carried the weight of shame in silence. Because that's what mothers do, isn't it? Until one night at dinner changed everything. I had made chicken pot pie, Ryan's favorite, hoping it might soften the tension. Jessica scrolled on her phone. Ryan sipped his beer. The air was thick with unspoken words. Then Ryan dropped his fork and leaned back. "Let's stop pretending this is short term," he said flatly. "We're not running a boarding house here." Jessica froze. I looked from her to him. "What are you saying?" He smirked. "I'm saying you're not working, you're not paying anything, and we're drowning in bills. We didn't sign up to feed an extra mouth." My chest tightened. My pulse raced. I turned to Jessica, desperate, but she wouldn't even meet my eyes. "Maybe it's best," she whispered, "if you find somewhere more stable, for everyone's sake." I didn't argue. I didn't even raise my voice. I walked to my room, packed 2 suitcases, the last fragments of my life, and left. Outside, the wind cut through my coat as I stood on the curb. Jessica didn't come down to say goodbye. Ryan didn't look away from the TV. I sat there for nearly an hour, my phone dead, my heart heavier than the luggage at my side. That night, I checked into a rundown roadside motel. Peeling wallpaper, buzzing lights, a vending machine that stole my quarters. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, asking myself how a lifetime of love could turn into abandonment so easily. The next morning, I texted Jessica. "I understand. I'll always love you." She never replied. Days turned into weeks. I sent birthday wishes, small updates, messages that went unanswered. 3 months slipped by, each one lonelier than the last. I tried finding work, grocery stores, diners, anywhere that would take me. But no one wanted to hire a grieving widow pushing 60 with no recent job history. I considered babysitting, cleaning houses, but my body ached in ways it never used to. Loneliness pressed on me like a weight. Worse than that, shame gnawed at me every time I thought about how much I had given Jessica, only for her to turn away. One evening, desperate for something to hold on to, I opened a small box of keepsakes I had managed to bring from the old house. Inside was my mother's old diary, its leather cover cracked and faded. I hadn't looked at it in years. For some reason, that night, I opened it. At first, it was ordinary. Talk of the weather, grocery complaints, Sunday sermons. But then the words shifted. "He came again today," one entry read. "He says he wishes he could make me his wife, but he has a family. Helen can never know. She must never know." My blood went cold. Page after page hinted at an affair, meetings in hotel rooms, envelopes of cash she tried to refuse, and initials scrawled in ink, H.J.S. Then came the entry that flipped my world upside down. She wrote that if anything happened to him, he promised to provide for Helen, that a lawyer named Goldstein would know what to do. Goldstein. The name echoed in my mind like a bell. I spent 2 days hunched over the motel's shared computer until I found him. Leonard Goldstein, a retired estate lawyer, still listed with a private firm in Dallas. I didn't have the courage to call. My hands shook too much. So I wrote him a letter explaining who I was, who my mother had been, and begging for answers. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. His voice cracked when I said my mother's name. "I always wondered if one day you'd reach out," he said. "There's something you need to see." The next morning, I boarded a Greyhound bus to Dallas with a suitcase half packed. I was terrified it was all a scam. But when I stepped into his quiet office lined with law books, I knew it was real. He handed me a yellowed envelope. Inside was a letter signed by Harold James Sterling, founder of Sterling Energy, one of Texas's biggest oil firms, a man I'd seen in newspaper photos all my life. A man with a wife, a family, and a reputation to protect. The letter began, "To my daughter, Helen Louise." I couldn't read more than a few lines without crying. He confessed to the affair, to his regrets, and to the love he never claimed publicly. He promised that part of his private fortune had been set aside for me, entrusted through Mr. Goldstein. Leonard slid a folder across the desk. Inside were account statements, deeds, investment papers, the total worth, a little over $1 million. "This is real?" I whispered. He nodded. "It's always been yours." I sat there stunned, my whole body trembling. For the first time in years, I felt seen. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't discarded. That night back in the motel, I stared at the cracked ceiling like I had for months. But for the first time, a smile crept across my face. Jessica and Ryan thought they'd erased me. But they had no idea I was just getting started. After that day in Dallas, the world looked different. I wasn't just Helen, the widow who had been pushed aside. I was someone with a secret, someone holding a power no one else could see. For a few days, I stayed in the city, walking through neighborhoods, sipping coffee at small diners, watching people go about their ordinary lives. Strangely, I didn't envy them. For the first time in months, I felt lighter. I wasn't defined by being abandoned anymore. I had something of my own. When I returned to Austin, I didn't go back to the dingy motel. I found a short-term rental just off South Congress, clean, bright, and far too expensive for the woman Ryan once mocked as dead weight. That thought alone made me stand taller. I began studying. At night, I devoured YouTube videos on real estate and finance. I learned the basics of contracts, property law, even dipped my toes into investing. Not because I wanted to build an empire, but because I refused to ever be powerless again. Then, one night while scrolling property listings, I saw it. A small apartment complex in East Austin. It wasn't glamorous paint peeling, plumbing issues, but it was still standing. And the location? It was the very complex where Jessica and Ryan lived. My hands shook as I read the details. The current owner had defaulted on property taxes, and the building was scheduled for auction in just 2 weeks. I couldn't believe it. Fate wasn't just handing me a card, it was handing me the entire deck. With Mr. Goldstein's help, I formed an LLC, hidden behind layers of legal paperwork. No one would know it was me. Then, I placed a bid. The auction came and went quickly. And just like that, without Ryan or Jessica having the slightest clue, I owned the building where they lived, the building they had once thrown me out of, with 2 suitcases and no goodbyes. When I signed the deed, I whispered under my breath, "Let's see how Ryan likes paying rent to the woman he couldn't stomach feeding." A month later, letters went out to all tenants. Lease terms were updated, rent adjusted to current market value. For Ryan and Jessica, that meant triple their old rate, not double triple. I didn't need to see his reaction to know he lost his temper. I could almost hear him shouting, throwing things, blaming Jessica. But I didn't care. This wasn't about money. It was about weight. They needed to feel the gravity of their choices. 2 days later, Jessica called me for the first time since the night they made me leave. Her voice shook on the voicemail. "Mom, I don't know if you've heard, but something's going on. Our rent just shot up. Ryan's furious. I don't know what to do. Can we talk?" I let it go unanswered. Justice doesn't always speak, it waits. Weeks passed. From my car, I drove by the building late at night. Lights on, shadows pacing, Ryan yelling, Jessica shrinking into the background. I watched just long enough to remember why I was doing this, then I drove away. Because even now, even after everything, my chest still ached for her. I didn't want to destroy her. I wanted her to wake up. One afternoon, I spotted Jessica at the grocery store. She looked worn down, hair tied back carelessly, dark circles under her eyes. Her cart was half empty. Rice, eggs, off-brand soup. I followed at a distance. She reached for a box of mac and cheese, then sighed and put it back. That broke me. Not because I pitied her, but because I remembered the little girl who used to cry over scraped knees, who once begged me to check for monsters under her bed. Now, she was living with one. I went home that day and sat in silence for hours, staring at the window. This wasn't revenge, this was consequence. I began slowly repairing the building, fixing locks, repairing pipes, updating hallways. Ryan didn't notice. He was too consumed with anger. He sent angry emails through the tenant portal, demanding answers, accusing the management of extortion. I smiled reading them. Meanwhile, I built a new life. I wore sharper clothes, joined small business meetups under the name of my LLC HLP Holdings. No one asked about my past. They only saw a quiet, confident woman who carried herself like someone who had always belonged at the table. One day, I passed Jessica and Ryan in the parking lot after a tenant meeting. My hair was neatly tied, sunglasses on, documents in hand. Jessica barely glanced at me. Ryan didn't recognize me at all. I walked past them with my head high. That night, I sat with a cup of tea, thinking how strange it was to walk past your own daughter and be invisible. Not because you're small, but because you've grown beyond who they remember. The voicemails from Jessica kept coming, soft, hesitant. "Hi, Mom. Just wanted to check in. I miss you." I never answered, not because I hated her, but because she needed to feel the silence she once gave me. When doubts crept in, I reopened my mother's diary. Her words, "Helen must never know," had once crushed me. Now they armored me. I knew the truth, and with truth, I was untouchable. Ryan's emails grew angrier. "This rent increase is robbery. I demand to know who owns this dump." I instructed the manager to reply with standard clauses. Nothing personal, just business. Ryan was unraveling. Jessica's messages shifted from guilt to desperation. "Please, can we talk? I need you." I didn't answer. Meanwhile, the building thrived. Other tenants paid on time, grateful for the improvements. The only chaos came from Ryan. But behind his bluster, the cracks were showing. Maintenance reported their unit was deteriorating, mildew in the bathroom, unpaid trash piling up. Jessica was spotted crying on the back steps. Ryan worked longer hours, trying to keep up, but it was never enough. From my new apartment overlooking their courtyard, I could see the shadows moving behind their curtains. I didn't watch often, just enough to remind myself that what they had done to me was real, that this wasn't some twisted dream. And yet, even as I watched their world shrink, part of me still ached, because Jessica wasn't just collateral. She was my daughter, and deep down, I was still waiting for her to choose differently. That choice came one rainy evening when my building's intercom buzzed. "This is Jessica Harmon. I was wondering if my mom lives here." My heart nearly stopped. I pressed the door release. 10 minutes later, there was a soft knock at my door. When I opened it, Jessica stood there, eyes swollen, clothes wrinkled, clutching herself like she might collapse. We stared at each other for what felt like hours. Finally, she whispered, "Hi, Mom." I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, as if she wasn't sure she was welcome. I poured 2 mugs of tea and sat across from her. "I don't even know where to start," she said, staring at her cup. "Ryan's angry all the time. Blames the rent, blames me, blames everything." I thought I was doing the right thing when we asked you to leave. I just wanted peace. I didn't want more fights. But now, I see what I let happen." Her voice cracked. "I miss you. I just don't know how to fix this." I studied her face, the same face I once kissed goodnight. She wanted forgiveness, but couldn't ask for it outright. So I gave her the only answer I could: silence. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. We sat like that for an hour. She didn't ask for money. She didn't even ask for help. She just wanted to sit in the same room with me. When she finally left, she reached for my hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I didn't reply. I just held her hand a moment longer before letting go. And as the door clicked shut, I knew something had shifted. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Jessica's visit stirred something inside me I thought was buried for good. She looked so fragile, like the little girl I once tucked into bed. But the truth was clear: her choices had led her into this storm. And Ryan was the thunder that would never stop. The days after her visit were heavy with silence. Then came the inevitable. Ryan's fury spilled over into threats. Angry notes slipped under the property office door, emails filled with accusations, even one unsigned letter left in my mailbox. "You think you're clever, but you don't scare me. I'll find out who you are." He didn't realize I had already prepared for this moment. With my lawyer's help, every move was documented. The tenant complaints, the falsified documents he tried to slip through, even recordings of his rants in the common areas. Ryan thought he was hunting a ghost. In truth, he was cornering himself. Meanwhile, Jessica drifted closer. She didn't call much, but she showed up twice more, once in tears, once with a quiet resolve I hadn't seen in years. The second time, she confessed, I left him. He packed his things and stormed out after another fight. I changed the locks the next morning. I studied her, searching for cracks of hesitation. But her eyes were steady. For the first time, she had chosen herself. Still, Ryan wasn't done. Days later, an email arrived with the subject line, "We need to talk now." His words were venom. "I know about the inheritance, about Sterling. About your little game with the building? You think you've won? If you don't undo this, I'll go public. Let's see how your reputation holds up when everyone knows where you came from." I didn't flinch. I forwarded the message to my attorney. By sunrise, Ryan had a cease and desist letter on his desk, stacked with evidence of harassment and defamation that could sink him financially for years. One more step out of line, and he'd face court. That was the last real sound I ever heard from him. A few vague social media posts followed, bitter hints of betrayal, but nothing with names. My attorney warned him once more, and he went silent. Ryan had become a ghost of his own making. Jessica, though, began to bloom. She moved into a small studio near her job, enrolled in therapy, even joined a local art class. One evening she showed up at my door, carrying a canvas, a painting of a phoenix in crimson and gold. "It reminded me of you," she said. I hung it above my fireplace. For the first time, the house felt like a home. Months passed. The building stabilized. Other tenants thrived under the improvements Ryan once mocked. My lawyer finalized the property transfer in my name. Soon after, I sold it. The profit was substantial, but money wasn't what mattered. Half went to a local shelter for women and children, fleeing abuse, the kind of place I wish I'd known existed the night I stood on the curb with nowhere to go. I asked them to dedicate a wing in my mother's name. The rest, I used to buy a modest 2-bedroom house in Cedar Park, shaded by old oak trees. The day Jessica helped me move in, she looked around with tears in her eyes. "I remember riding my bike down this street," she said softly. I nodded. "You were always safe here," I told her. She leaned into me, whispering, "I forgot what that felt like." We didn't mention Ryan. We didn't need to. His chapter was over. That night, after Jessica left, I sat on the porch swing with a mug of tea. The moonlight stretched across the yard, and for the first time in years, I whispered the words I once thought I'd never say. "I forgive you," not to Jessica, to myself. Because forgiveness isn't about erasing the past, it's about releasing the grip it holds on your heart. I opened my mother's diary one last time, slipped a note inside for Jessica to find someday. "You don't need anyone's permission to be strong. Never forget who you are." Then I closed it and set it on the shelf, not as a burden, but as a reminder of where I came from. What I learned is simple, but it cuts deep. Sometimes the people you love most will betray you. Sometimes silence from family hurts more than words from enemies. But betrayal doesn't define you, it frees you. It forces you to see what you're really made of. Revenge isn't about shouting, or burning bridges, or screaming, "I told you so." True revenge is living in your own strength, building a life so steady that the people who underestimated you can't help but feel the weight of their own choices. Jessica lost her way, but she found it again. I was discarded, but I rose stronger. And Ryan? He proved what cruelty does, it eats itself alive. So if you're listening to this and you've ever been pushed aside, let my story be a reminder. Your power is not in their approval. Your worth isn't tied to their acceptance. Sometimes the best revenge is becoming someone they can never forget, someone who doesn't need them to survive. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If you felt something in this story, if you've ever faced betrayal and risen stronger, please subscribe to Sweet Revenge. Here, we share stories that prove dignity, justice, and resilience always find a way. Your voice matters, and maybe your story will be the next one we tell.